Israel's war in Lebanon has intensified. 5 UN peacekeepers were injured in Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon over the past few days. The UN Secretary General said these attacks were a violation of international humanitarian law. Prime Minister Netanyahu demanded that the UN remove its peacekeepers immediately from, quote, Hezbollah strongholds and the combat zones, unquote. Meanwhile, Hezbollah, while severely weakened, is not out. Over this weekend, it has launched hundreds of projectiles into Israeli territory. Hovering above all this is the near certainty that Israel is going to strike Iran directly soon. Joining me now are Rrendة Slim, Conflict Resolution Director at the Middle East Institute, and Richard Haas, the President Emeritus at the Council on Foreign Relations. Rrendة, let me start with you. You were born in Lebanon, you have family there. Tell me what is going on there, and what do you make, not of Israeli operations, which seem at a tactical level to be very effective, but Prime Minister Netanyahu's now stated goal, which he said in the speech, which is that he was asking the Lebanese people to rise up and get rid of Hezbollah. Is that possible?
Which is a recipe for civil war. The Israelis tried that in 1982 to impose a Pax Israeliana on Lebanon during that invasion of Lebanon. Their proxy, Mr. Gemayel, was assassinated. As a result of that, Hezbollah was formed in 1982 and a much more potent enemy to Israel than the PLO, which was kicked out of Lebanon at the time as a result of the invasion. And then we had the US paid a heavy price for that. 241 service members were assassinated in a suicide bomb by a group, Islamic Jihad at the time. Now we know it is Hezbollah. The war does not seem to be limited. In fact, if you look at the military evacuation order issued by the Israelis, they go into villages as far as 40 kilometers north of the Blue Line, which is the unofficial border between Israel and Lebanon. You have already 1.1 million Lebanese displaced inside the country, on top of the 1.2 million Syrian refugees and more than 200,000 Palestinian refugees. There is no safe area in Lebanon right now. Israeli strikes are, not only in southern Lebanon, not only in the southern suburbs of Beirut. It is in the north, it's in the northeast, in the Biqa, it's even in the capital. They are targeting residential neighborhoods, arguing that Hezbollah members or Hezbollah offices exist, but still, according to international law, they have the responsibility, they have the legal responsibility to avoid civilian casualties, even while targeting Hezbollah and Hezbollah officers or Hezbollah figures. And the death toll. In the last 2 weeks, we have had more than 2,000 people killed. Most of them are civilians, women and children. Unfortunately, I don't see either side, willing to end this at this point, although we have a short window of opportunity to pivot away from the military operations into a diplomatic process.
Let me ask you, Richard. In Israel, I think there's overwhelming consensus that this was something they had to do because Hezbollah had been raining projectiles on them. How do you see it?
It was something Israel had to do, and it's something Israel had the right to do. Lebanon has the sovereign obligation to make sure its territory is not used by itself or anyone else, in this case Hezbollah, to attack other countries. They're unable to fulfill that sovereign obligation, so to me, Israel had every right to go in. Israel has now realized its initial war aims. You have Hezbollah saying, we are prepared for a ceasefire. They have delinked that from a ceasefire in Gaza. The whole Israeli national security goal is to allow 60 to 70,000 Israelis who were moved back after October 7th to move back to their homes. Presumably that can happen. What's happening now, though, Fareed, is really interesting. In the midst of war, Israel has essentially upped its war aims. It reminds me a little bit of what happened to the United States in Korea. After we pushed back the North to the 38th parallel, we said, maybe now we can go further.
I've thought of the same. And so the hubris of having succeeded is making them push. Do you think the danger is then they do get mired in a civil war?
I think the danger is overreach. And the idea that you can, quote unquote, eliminate Hezbollah that you can divorce it entirely from the population. Now again, Hezbollah is a foreign entity to some extent. It's an instrument of Iranian policy. But I think the danger in Israeli policy is the elimination goal. To get a Lebanon strong enough and willing to oust Hezbollah, I think is an unrealistic aim.
And they are, correct me if I'm wrong, Randa, they do represent the Shia, who are the single largest minority. I mean, the plurality in Lebanon, right?
Exactly. I mean, unlike 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon to kick out the PLO, PLO was a foreign implant into the country. They did not have much of a supporting milieu. Hezbollah is a Lebanese militant group, is a Lebanese political party. It has a supporting milieu in the Shia community. They have also engaged in hubris and arrogance since 2006 after they brought the war with Israel to a stalemate. But, I mean, you cannot marginalize Hezbollah, you cannot marginalize the Shia from any kind of political process going forward.
So let me ask you then, in that case, is there some, people talk about getting back to the UN resolution, which both sides argue the other side has violated. Is that a possibility, briefly?
My guess is the UN resolution 1701 is too ambitious because it calls, among other things, for the demilitarization, the disarmament of all groups. But could you get back to a situation where Hezbollah essentially moves north, where Israel could once again safely, realistically put its people back in the northern reaches of Israel? Yes. The real question is, what is the extent, what is the ambition of Israeli war aims? And that's what this is about.